Welcome or welcome back to Trail and Ultra Running Training. My name is Will Franz. I'm a running coach, strength coach, and the whole goal of this podcast is to help you get a little more information for your training so you can train better and just have more fun on the trails. If you like the information, I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe or leave a rating or review or share it with somebody or one of the many things that you have heard 1,000 times on the internet that just helps push the information out to more people so more people see it, we can all train better and have more fun. If you're watching this live on Instagram, I've been told that the volume is kind of low. I think I have a fix for that, but the fix for that is currently out of batteries. So I'm just going to roll with it today. Done is better than perfect, and we will try the fix next time. So today I want to talk a little bit about strength training. And I think I'm going to make this a series of talks on strength work so that I'm not doing a full hour and a half lecture on what your strength training should look like. I think it's probably a little better digested in smaller bites. So if we look at strength work, we can categorize things into probably 5 or 6 or 8 movements. I don't know. We're going to talk about 5. And those 5 are going to be a squat, a hinge, a push, a pull, and then core stuff. Um, and this is where things get a little weird in the categorization, right? A squat is when your knees and your hips tend to move at the same time. You will also hear these referred to as like knee dominant movements. And we'll get to why in a second, because today I'm going to talk about squats. A hinge is where your hips are really the only thing moving. If you want an image of this, think like a deadlift. Yes, your knees work a little bit there to get down to the floor, but the most of the movement should be coming from your hips. A push is where we're pushing stuff away from us, either in this like horizontalish plane or this vertical plane. And sometimes people categorize those separately. I kind of do in programming, but not when we're talking about big grand scheme things like today. A pull be when you're pulling stuff toward you, again, in this like horizontal or vertical plane. Um, Again, I think about them differently in programming, then I'm going to talk about them over the next few weeks. And then core stuff. If you've ever read any books by Dan John, like what's the one I have up here, Never Let Go, he will often do the fifth one as carries. Some people will do rotation. There's a bunch of stuff, but I just kind of think of this like entire midsection core stability, abs, low back, this part. We should train that as well, right? So squat, hinge, push, pull, core stuff. Now that we have that out of the way, I want to talk about the squat today and a bunch of varieties that you might see or might consider depending on your experience and background and general ability to lift stuff. So again, a squat is something where a movement where we like move the knees and the hips at the same time. If you look up a squat on the internet, if you've seen someone squat, we all have a basic idea of what a squat leads to. Your knees and your hips both move, right? Like you're not just hinging from their hips, and you're rarely just where we do something called a squat, just moving at the knees. It is usually both. So if we look at a few varieties, there's the classic back squat. There's actually 2 versions of this, or probably infinite, depending on how anal retentive we want to get. But there's a high bar and a low bar. High bar is going to sit like here, up on your traps, and the low bar is going to sit more down like here, off the upper portion of your shoulders. And for most runners, it doesn't really matter. They are different movements. A low bar back squat, you can move more weight. It's a little more hip dominant. It is what powerlifters use. If you've ever seen a video of someone squatting like 800 pounds, it's almost guaranteed that it was some form of low bar squat, just because you're able to get more of yourself under the bar. Whereas a high bar squat is going to require a little more on the like abdominal engagement side. It's going to be a little more quad dominant instead of like glute or hip. And it is going to keep you a little more upright. Again, we're quibbling over details that probably don't really matter if we're just trying to get stronger to run better. But if you really enjoy lifting, like these are some things you could play with. Now, I rarely include a like heavy back squat for people in running season because I think it's a really valuable movement. It teaches really good control of your body. You're able to move a ton of weight. And by moving a ton of weight, we can get really strong. We can develop really big, strong glutes. We can get our quads to move a lot of weight. We can get the hips and the feet to get in very good in line alignment. So we're actually able to create a bunch of force through everything. And I think it is a valuable thing for us to be able to do, but it is also a ton of systemic like pressure and fatigue on the body. And unless you are a fairly experienced lifter who enjoys it, knows what they're doing, etc., it is probably more than we want to put in season while we're really cranking running volume. So if you've heard me talk about seasons in the past, if not, it's a few episodes ago. This is one of those things that we would target more in the off season, right? And then so moving from a back squat, there's a front squat. So we could categorize a bunch of stuff. Basically, the weight is in front of you. Instead of being back here, it's going to be in the front. Traditional front squat, like a bar is kind of rest on your collarbones. You have stability either in this like cross position or up and underneath. You keep your chest up, and it's a very quad dominant movement. And we are able to move a good amount of load here. And it is a really good target for us as runners. I like to start people here because we get a bunch of core stability, upper back engagement. I really appreciate the fact that it keeps your chest up and forces your core to be stable as we move a bunch of weight through the legs. But again, this could be, depending on you and your history, a difficult movement to learn. It could be a challenge. It might just not be necessary. I have some people who, if you've ever really broken your collarbone and you have a plate here, it can be a little more struggle than it's worth, right? But it is a really valuable thing that, if nothing else, teaches really good posture while we go through other movements and reinforces posture that's going to help us run well. And other movements that would be in this like front squat category would be a goblet squat. So if I just take my coffee cup, we can get up and underneath a weight and hold it out here. That would be our goblet position, or a Zercher squat, where you actually hold the weight in the crooks of your elbows. And that will also help you, that will force you to like front load, maintain a lot of that stability that we talked about. It's not particularly comfortable on the elbow, on the tendons that like cross the elbow here. Um, but it is really heavily loadable. It's less fatigue on the overall system, and it is a good movement to include in your training. Past the like bar loaded big bilateral, meaning like both sides at one time movements, we also have like single leg or split leg movements. So these are anything from lunges to stationary lunges, which I would call a split squat, to walking lunges. Any of these things are going to Bulgarian split squats, or rear foot elevated split squats, where you have your back foot up and you're loading the front. These are, I would say, the bread and butter of what I do for a lot of squat movements in season for athletes, because they tend to be a little less systemically fatiguing. They do, in many ways, mimic running more because you're putting a lot more load on a single leg at a time. And depending which ones we use, they're still really heavily loadable without putting quite as much overall fatigue on the body. So something like a walking lunge, you're not going to be able to load that as much as a back squat. But if we do it properly, you're still going to have to use a lot of stability through your entire torso. You are still going to put a ton of weight through your leg. We're still going to get a lot of glute drive. We're going to get some hip extension in the back leg. I think a walking lunge done well is one of the best movements anybody can do, and it has a ton of crossover to running. And then if we look at something like a Bulgarian, that's going to be a stationary version of that that loads the front leg even heavier. It's great for glute development. It is great for hip drive. It is really loadable once you're able to like create that stability. It forces that stability, which is a nice little side benefit. But any of these movements are really valuable, and it's something that you will see in my strength programming pretty much throughout, because they're either going to be a little more accessory movements in the off season, or they're going to be the prime squat driving movements when we're actually running a lot. And let's look at some like, I don't know what to call them, honorable mentions, maybe. So if we have our big three, back squat, front loaded squat, and then some kind of like single leg or split stance movement, there's a bunch of other stuff we can look at as well. So one would be a belt squat. It's kind of a rare piece of equipment, but I'm seeing them more and more. We have one at my gym and I like it a lot. And belt squat is you put a belt around your hips and the weight is actually below you. So you don't have any requirements of your core to stabilize this weight, and you can just put it through your legs. I also use this because it almost like provides some traction to the spine instead of compression. So it is a great way to add extra load to the legs, especially if we have like some back issues or we're struggling to create form. I put everybody from like non-athletic 80-year-olds to athletic 30-year-olds on this thing, 20-year-olds on this thing, and it is done very well. It has a high potential to cover a wide range of people, move a bunch of load without creating as much like overall fatigue and just a little more ability to create support. In line with that is the leg press. And I think a lot of people can be scared of doing the leg press because there are terrible videos out on the internet. Please do not send them to me. I will not watch them. They're awful. But if we load this thing well and we place our feet well, the big things for the leg press is your low back needs to stay down, because when we have that rounding at the bottom, that's where we end up with spine things. And then do not hyperextend your knees at the top with a ton of load on it, and then your knees are going to stay safe. But as long as we stay in that safe range of motion where our low back stays against the pad, and then we maintain control at the top, we're going to be okay. And this is one of the things I'm doing right now because I'm pretty significantly increasing my running volume and frequency. So I'm actually taking a lot of the like overall fatigue off of my body by just putting some leg press into my programming. We can also do one more thing on the leg press. If you don't have a ton of time to learn to squat well and you have a goal that really matters to you and you just need to get strong, then this can be a good way to build strength without having to go through a bunch of skill development. Now, I don't think that's an excuse to not learn to squat. I think squatting is valuable. I think it is a good thing to learn to do just for your long-term health and benefits and whatever. You'll be a stronger human overall if you're able to squat well. However, if you don't have time, I know some like NCAA coaches who just put kids on the leg press because they have to get ready for game time and they have like a couple weeks of prep and they're not going to waste a bunch of that time learning to squat well. So it is a valuable tool that I've underappreciated in the past in the like realm of like my functional movements and whatever thoughts in heavy quotes, but it is a really valuable tool if you need it. A couple other things that we can use, and I use these more as like reparative movements, would be a leg extension. So if you just need to get quad development, or there's some knee stuff going on, or we really need to figure out something, or why, like a leg extension, you sit and all you do is extend your knees. So this isn't really a full squat. This would be why we like categorize this in the knee dominant movement space. There's reasons to use this. I almost never program this for anybody. Running is such a quad heavy sport anyway. I don't put a ton of extra volume onto it, but it can be good for like rehabilitation purposes. Something that is a body weight version of this, you might see a sissy squat where you like drive your knees forward, keep your core stable, and then pull yourself back up to top with your quads. Same idea. It's an underloaded quadricep heavy movement that we can use for rehab and can really help with knee health if we don't have anything else. If I had the choice, I would probably put someone on a leg extension over doing a sissy squat, but a lot of the time we just don't have access to one based on where we are. So those are both decent options. And then finally, one that I've overlooked for a long time, to my detriment, is any kind of like lateral movement. I used to do a lot of Cossack squats like years ago when I was really obsessed with body weight movements and played with all those varieties. And then it just kind of fell out of favor. Like you go through cycles and you overlook things and just kind of lose appreciation. And I think this has not been helpful for my overall development, especially my hip health. So some version of like lateral lunge where you stand with your feet together and then you step out to the side, sink back into the hip, try to keep the other foot on the ground, come back up to top. You will see multiple versions of this. The big difference here is as you sit down into, let's say, your left leg, your right foot can either stay like flat and pointed forward, or it can rotate and point up. I think that flat and pointed forward tends to provide some nice secondary benefits to the leg, unless you are trying to build towards like a split where we're really trying to like get the femur super open. I think actually maintaining that control at the bottom tends to create a little more like carryover for power. But lateral lunge, Cossack squat, either of these can be really valuable additions. So again, we have the back squat. Classic, mostly going to be an off-season movement for me, for athletes, just because it's a lot of systemic fatigue. Front squat, kind of the same thing. There's a lot more variety here where we could do like a goblet. The fact that your arms are probably not going to hold up however much weight is a limiter in and of itself. Or a Zercher squat, same idea. Your elbow tendons are probably going to be angry at you before we get a heavy enough weight that it's going to be a huge problem from your overall development. But the traditional front squat is really heavily loadable and valuable, but maybe not in season movement. Then we have our single leg-ish movements like the Bulgarian or the walking lunge or the rear lunge or the stationary split squat. All of these have their place depending on where you are in your training. And I think they are a really, I don't know, potentially the best thing to be doing in season, or at least some variety thereof. And then for our like honorable mentions, there was a belt squat, leg press, leg extension. All of these are nice accessories if we need to add extra volume to the legs and you're able to take it, but you don't want that overall systemic fatigue so that we can run better. And then finally, one that I've really overlooked that I'm trying to get back to in this next phase of my programming is going to be some version of a lateral lunge. And that is largely going to be to force a little more hip movement. So this is not going to be one that you're going to load super heavy, but you can load it heavy enough, much like the walking lunge, where we put our hip through a different plane, different range of movement, and it'll be helpful. So it's going to be part one. We're going to do a few more of these. Again, I kind of categorize mentally movements into 5 things: be squat, hinge, push, pull, crochet. And if we end up, so we're going to do at least 5 of these. And if anybody has questions, please like shoot them my way. I'd be happy to address them or do an episode or whatever we need to do on the next one. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Really appreciate it. Hope you have a great day and go have fun on the trails.